every so often, very rare for me, but every so often, the universe, God, luck, however you want to believe in it, really just throws me a bone. And I'm always supremely grateful for such a thing, but I am very grateful for today's episode of Comic Book Breakdown. Uh, I've talked a little bit on the show before that I'm a Godzilla fan. I've read a number of different Godzilla comics. I'm constantly experimenting. I'm constantly trying to like Godzilla comics. And a couple months ago, I'd heard about Godzilla Monster Piece Theater, a series of one-shots that IDW was going to be publishing that add Godzilla into classic pieces of literature. The first of which was going to be Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla. And I kind of just looked around and I was like, that's potentially one of the dumbest ideas that I've ever heard. That sounds amazing. How could you not be interested in that? Like, just how do you do that? What do you do with that, right? Um, my mind started spinning in all different directions as far as like what I would do and how would you handle something like that. And I picked up the issue, and I've got a friend at work who's a Godzilla fan, and then I have a friend at work who's just a comic guy in general. And when I mentioned it to them, they were like, "We gotta check this out." So I let them read it, um, and it was a good time overall. And then I started getting back into being able to do breakdowns a little bit. My schedule's been clearing up thanks to my daughter napping a little bit more reliably in the afternoons. The real trick being me not needing to nap. But I was getting back in the swing of things with breakdown, and I decided to check the email, which I have not checked in months. And I had a couple week old message from an author named Adam Tierney asking if I would like to interview him for the show. And my first thought, of course, was like, oh, well, this has got to be fake. Like, the amount of emails that I get that are just some random person being like, hey, if you pay me some money, I can get you more subscribers. And I don't care for that kind of thing at all. And so I won't lie, I've just gotten comfortable ignoring my emails. And then here's a person reaching out being like, hey, I'm a real person who wrote comic books. Would you be interested in having me on the show? And so I looked him up. And lo and behold, Adam Tierney was one of the authors of Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla. He was the author. I'm sorry. He was the author of Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla. And I was like, are you kidding me? And then as I looked into him more, I saw that he'd worked on video games in the past. He's written a little bit for TV, and then he's working on comic books now, kind of as like a side job hobby kind of thing. And I was flabbergasted and amazed. Like, what a beautiful gift, like I said, from the universe or God or however you want to take it. And so I said yes, and that is what today's bonus episode of Comic Book Breakdown is going to be. Adam came on the show. We had a very nice and long conversation about Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla, as well as his upcoming comic 13 Demons Dead from IDW. We open with Godzilla and then we move into 13 Demons, and I'm just going to present that interview here for you all. I hope you have a good time with it. It was such a blast having him on the show. It was a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to the comic book this August. Order it at your local comic shops or bookstore or Amazon. Available everywhere. So without me being any more in the way, my name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode, I think I'm going to call this one 36, episode 36, interview with Adam Tierney. As far as Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla is concerned, I did enjoy it overall. When I initially saw the announcement, the first thought I had was just like, that's so stupid of a pairing. Like Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla, these are two flavors that don't go together. What do you do? I have to check this out. And then reading it, I was like, no, that's kind of exactly what I think you would do with this. That was really fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was kind of funny because It happened via like I actually pitched IDW on a bunch of different Godzilla books because my original book that we're going to talk about later, 13 Demons Dead, I was working with Jake was my editor and he was also the Godzilla guy. And so he said, "Yeah, if you have any Godzilla ideas, give me a list." And so I gave him a list and one of them just for whatever reason I put Romeo and Juliet versus Godzilla. And then shortly after that, he reached out and said, "Hey, the Tom Scioli series, Monsterpiece Theater, which kind of started by focusing on Godzilla meeting Great Gatsby and a bunch of other characters, was such a success. They wanted to do an anthology, and he said your Romeo and Juliet idea could kind of fit into that. So was this nice kind of like, meeting of the minds where nobody came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" I basically said, "Hey, here's a crazy idea I'd want to do," and it was able to slot nicely into one of their initiatives.
That's that like what perfect timing. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
Godzilla wanted it to happen. It had to be.
Yeah, it's an idea the universe needed to exist.
Uh Along those lines, from your perspective, like the idea came from you, so I'm assuming you had some kind of structure for
Yeah.
what you had in mind for it. What for you was the most challenging aspect of writing it? Because I like excuse me, the idea of taking this classical piece of literature and this being like, what if I put a giant monster in it? Feels very incongruous. And then what was the most fun part for you?
So I think the toughest part is just honestly getting all of the major beats in there in such a compact issue. So it's like a double-size issue. I think it's about 35 pages for our story,
Yeah.
but there's so much story and so much dialogue, just the critical stuff that you have to go through in Romeo and Juliet. So that was the toughest part. And I remember asking Jake early on, like, can I have 36? Can I have 37? He's like, no, it's locked at 35. So I had to make some pretty tough choices as far as like getting it all crammed in there. Because on the other hand, it's not just about getting those moments in from the original story, but I want to have those big moments where you turn the page and it's just a full page splash of Godzilla emerging, or we have our wooden Mecha Godzilla, Automatazilla, like
Yeah.
having like those moments for those things. So you have to, it's really hard to cram all that in. So that was the toughest part. Probably the most fun part was initially the idea was that we didn't necessarily have to keep writing in Shakespeare's style, which is very complex. Anybody who knows like iambic pentameter and rhyming and on the stanzas and all that stuff, it's really challenging. And I talked to my editor Jake about that. Like I'm like, should we do that? He's like, nah, it's fine. You could just do it more casual. But I realized if you don't do that, you lose all of those memorable lines. There's no way to do a Romeo and Juliet where it's like you have, wherefore art thou Romeo, and then the next line they're just like, hey, what's up? So
Yeah.
we basically just did a deep dive into that and wrote it as much as possible in the style of Shakespeare. That was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun to describe Godzilla and Mothra and the kaiju and the new element specifically, but in that same writing style. That was probably my most fun thing of the process.
That was one of the things that I felt stuck out to me the most because I do feel like a lot of the dialogue is like Shakespearean.
Yeah, yep,
It's either like taken from the page or very inspired by it. There were a couple parts that very specifically rhymed that I
yeah.
was like, I feel like this is him trying to get in the non-Shakespearean dialogue that
Yeah.
you have to have.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Godzilla doesn't appear in Shakespeare,
No, no.
but then how do you bridge that gap kind of thing?
No, and even looking up like, what words existed in that time, because like a lot of words and phrases that
Sure.
we rely on now were not a thing back then. And there's a couple anachronistic parts where it gets a little bit meta or a little bit silly or a little bit modern. I think like one character at one point, it's like when he's smitten with Juliet, one of them says like, "Methinks his brain is broken." That's not a saying they had back then, but
Sure.
I like kind of playing with that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was interesting to get into that. And again, like you said, the rhyming and the iambic pentameter, the way it works is it's basically uh it goes ba 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 ba, like it's a stressor on off syllables. Shakespeare does it perfectly. I kind of fumbled my way through it, but it was fun to try and keep that rhythm and keep those rhymes. And there's just something nice about rhymes, like when
Yeah.
the villain is like making his big monologue and he's ending on two words rhyming, it just feels so much more dramatic.
Well, and there was something that was oddly sweet about later on in the comic when his wife goes to Mothra And there
Yes.
was something about that rhyming that I don't know. It just that scene in particular really worked for me with her like reaching out to Mothra, even in the
Yeah.
sense of like, get out of here so I don't have to deal with you anymore,
Right, right,
please.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was a interesting character connection between these two people, this a person and then this giant monster, ostensibly.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that it worked really nicely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no,
Um,
I tried to put some depth on whatever characters were in there, and so it's glad to hear that that resonated.
well, that's I really appreciated because again, going into it, I was like, how are you going to make this work? And there's the one framing sequence where Mothra and Godzilla see each other for the first time, and
Yep.
Romeo and Juliet see each other for the first
Yep.
time, and I went, I got it. Okay, cool. Suddenly, like the connection here makes a lot more
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah, I'm a huge Mothra fan. I've got like Mothra toys all over and stuff.
Oh,
And this is the cute Mothra. And so that was the first thing I wanted to do is I said, okay, well, I got to put Mothra in because Mothra is my favorite. And also the Shobijin, the little teeny
yep.
caretakers, the fact that I made them the chorus, that was a lot of fun at the beginning and end of
I
the book.
I was
But
so glad they got to open up the story.
yeah, yeah. And but going back to what you were just saying, it's kind of funny, and a lot of that kind of came from suggestions from our editor, Jake. But it's as I think as close as I've ever seen to Godzilla and Mothra being in love. Like there's a lot of like forlorn, glances at each other and worrying about each other and stuff. Maybe they're just very close friends, but it was kind of fun to play on that and make that a parallel to the Romeo and Juliet stuff.
I do feel like that's a ship that's taken off in America more
Mhm.
specifically,
Right,
especially in
yeah.
the past like 10 to 15 years with the legendary
Yeah,
films.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know if it has really ever been a thing in the Japanese side.
Right.
I do think that there's a symbiosis there, but I don't feel like the Japanese directors were specifically hinting at an emotional relationship, whereas
Yeah.
Americans we were like, no, they love each other and they'll die for each other.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's great,
Yeah,
guys.
especially that second American movie when she swoops in and saves him. I mean I get my heartstrings pulled at that moment.
Obviously, you did get to introduce Automatazilla.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, was there any monsters that were off the table? Was everything was on the table as far as you're aware?
Yeah, I mean, well, we didn't ask for that much.
That's
We
fair.
we initially we knew it was going to be Godzilla. That's the title.
Sure.
And then we it made sense to bring in Mothra because then you have the immediate parallel. And it actually wasn't in the initial draft that we didn't have like a Mecha Godzilla comp. And then as Jake and I were kind of going back and forth on the plot, and he was saying, "Oh, what about more about this, more about this?" I threw out the idea, well, what if we did like a Clockwork Mechagodzilla? And he said, "Oh, that's great. Like, let's do exactly that." And so we had that. We called him Automatazilla because if you search automatons, they are these weird, creepy, clockworky robots from like over 100 years ago, and it's like that
Yeah.
kind of makes sense. It's kind of like the whole. They're almost like the little characters that come out of like a cuckoo clock and they have like one or two functions. So we're like, what if we just have a massive version of that and everything is low tech, so it's all steam powered and fire powered and blades and gears and stuff. And then of course when Sean Peacock, the artist, started designing him, it just like took it to 1,000% better. So I love his art so much on this book, but especially I love his renderings of that character.
I really enjoyed that it was very much a throwback to the 1970s terror of Mechagodzilla design. Like as when I was younger, I really liked the more modern
Yeah,
Mechagodzillas because they're just more mechanical and they're more like badass looking. But I rewatched the Terror of Mechagodzilla, I want to say like a year or two ago, and it's so good
yeah,
overall that it made me re-fall in love with that particular iteration. So to get
yeah.
to see him show up alongside like 70s Godzilla and
Hmm.
then classic Mothra, I
Yeah,
was like, this feels like all the same era of characters. So like from a
exactly.
time period perspective, it all worked really well.
Yeah, and just like the shapes, like the classic Mechagodzilla, like the big, square snouts and all that. I love that.
Yeah, the big tummy.
Yep, yep,
The big why do you have that tummy is
yep,
great.
exactly.
Given that you are the one who pitched Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla, do you have a dream Godzilla mashup that you'd love to work on?
There's
Oh,
big tummy mecha right
heck
there.
yeah. That's I've got
From
mine hanging up.
Oh, nice. I think for me, I mean, this was a great way into it. I would love to do. well, two things. I'd love to do more. I mean, I know it's kind of we did it once, but I love working with Sean. I'd love to do more Shakespearean stuff. I'd love to,
Okay,
explore something like either Hamlet or one of the other like darker plays like Othello or something like that.
sure.
I think those would be really fun to do. But aside from that, I'm like I said, I'm just a huge Mothra fan. I would love to do something with Mothra and the Shobijin and just all around that, like in their weird island that they're on, and the singing and the all of the bizarre stuff. I pitched Jake on that, and unfortunately they had just done a Mothra series around the time where they were just kicking it off when I was pitching that. So it's kind of like, okay, well, we already did that. But I will be a broken record on that one until I get to work on like a dedicated Mothra book for sure.
That's fantastic. I do think that Mothra's theme is one of the best kaiju themes. Like
Yep,
Godzilla and Mothra to me
exactly. Yep.
are right next to each other. My wife and I are big fans of, I don't know if you're familiar with Riff Tracks, the old
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
MST3K
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, yeah.
We love their Mothra one
Oh, I've never
specifically.
seen it. I'll have to check
It,
that out.
it's it's so funny. But yeah, we love that. And then that really got us into like, because you have to listen to the theme a couple times.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then we were like, wow, this theme's really good. And then we saw
Yeah.
King of Monsters in theater and the music starts playing. And I'm like, oh,
Yep. Yep.
and she's just like, I get it, I get it, I get it. And I was just so
Exactly.
excited. Yeah, they did such a good job. Speaking of things that I'm excited about, coming up this August, you have your first graphic novel, which
Yes.
which boggles my mind that you're like relatively new to the comic scene and you come in with like you had pitched a graphic novel first and then you got to work on a Godzilla comic kind of in the meantime.
Hmm.
And I was just like, what? How does that happen? That's crazy to me.
Just milking every relationship and every hitting every email I could. But yeah, it started as I was in the gaming industry, and we were talking with, which I've done for 20 years, and I'm still in there. And we were talking to IDW about video games because they're very transmedia. So IDW, they do TV shows, they do
Sure.
movies, and so they got like a, kind of fingers and everything. And so we were talking with video games, and then at the tail end of that conversation, I said, I did a children's book for Kickstarter. It was a horror book called Afraid of Everything. Now that I've sent out the Kickstarter copies, the self-printed copies, I need an actual publisher. And I got kind of chummy with their editor-in-chief at the time, John, and John Barber, the writer of
Sure.
Optimus Prime and a bunch of their Transformer stuff. And he was like, "Oh, this is great," and like it's already done. And so they ended up publishing that for me around COVID time. And then ever since then, I just stayed in contact and talked about projects and stuff. I really wanted to do a comic, so yeah, basically, I pitched them this idea called 13 Demons Dead, and it's kind of my take on. I love just horror, adventure, horror, monster of the week type stuff, and huge fan of Mr. John Constantine. I like the new pop figure they
Oh,
came out with him. It's just great.
that's
And
awesome.
he's my favorite comic character of all time. And so I
Okay.
basically just kind of pitched my take on Hellblazer, but instead of 30, 40-year-old man, what if it's a 14-year-old girl? So now you
Sure.
have like all of the demon slaying and monster fighting and stuff, but you also have to deal with grades and bullies and high school and all that stuff. So it's kind of just like everything I like writing about, crammed together. Very cute, very silly, but also very horror-y, very gory as you go along too.
So that was you sent over a couple preview chapters
Yeah.
and I've reread them a couple times to kind of put my thoughts together. I've mentioned on the show before that I don't really like to break down a comic in progress
Hmm.
because it's so hard to judge an artistic work as it's happening because you
Yeah.
don't know what's
Yeah.
going to change before the end of the book. And so I kept rereading it to roll stuff around in my mind. And on one of the read throughs, one of the things that really stuck out for me is it's incredibly violent for
Oh
a
yeah.
book that looks as cute as it is.
Yes.
Um, the artwork is really adorable. It's detailed. It's really intricate. But the characters are all pretty cutesy. It
Yeah.
it did bring to mind a little bit of the River City Girls
Oh
kind of art
yeah. Oh
style to
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And then I was rereading it and I was like, oh, there's a lot of blood.
Yeah.
Oh, this
Oh yeah.
character this character's getting their arm snapped, and it's not like an off panel we're
Nope.
implying the horror. You see it. His
Yeah.
his hand gets mauled in one
Yeah.
panel, and you see it. It brought to mind for me of when I was younger and I was discovering anime on like cable
Oh yeah.
TV,
Oh
and
yeah.
you would just be channel surfing, and then you'd hit something that you'd never heard of before. And like I said, it's got people are getting the crap beat out of them and heads are exploding, and you're just like, what am I seeing? This is incredible. From your perspective, is there a little bit of anime in there, or is this
Oh,
just more of you?
totally.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. And I mean, I was the perfect age. I was, I was born in 78. I was raised in the 80s. So all of my formative years, as far as figuring myself out with as a writer, were Akira, Ninja Scroll, Ghost in the Shell,
yeah,
and also like Liquid Television on MTV and Aeon Flux, and so yeah, all of that contributes. And yeah, I really wanted to do something. I thought early on like, well, do I need to censor this as far as like the language or the violence because it really does have kind of like a like a YA tone, and I'm like, I don't want to necessarily drive away, an audience of like, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And I asked my editor again, Jake, about that. He's like, nah, just do whatever. Like they really didn't have any requests to, neuter it or censor it. So it's like, all right. So, there's not that much cussing. There's a lot of blood though. And even what you've seen in like the first two chapters is nothing compared to like later in the books. I mean, it's like it gets pretty like Evil Dead or Peter Jackson, Sam Raimi, like those are my influences filmically.
wow,
So I love that stuff. And I wanted to do something. I love the like the structure of like a movie where you have a hero and you just drag them through the muck and just like the worst experience of their life and they come out the other side stronger. Like perfect examples like, Kill Bill or something like that, where it's just
sure.
you have somebody just mercilessly beat up and just run through the ringer, barely surviving. And so that's kind of Ev's journey in this book in 13 Demons Dead over the course of what happens in 12 months of her time, a full school year. And yeah, I just wanted to do something whereas it's got cute moments and it's got a lot of her being silly with her best friend Jeannie and going to school and dealing with bullies, but then it's also got a lot of like evisceration and cutting limbs off and cutting through heads and stuff as you go too.
Well, and that was one of the things that surprised me about myself reading it is when I had that moment of realization of like, this is really gory. The new dad in me was like, oh, well, you can't let a kid read this. And then the part of me that grew up, like I said, on anime and stuff like that was like, no, how is this any different than me wanting to watch
Right.
Dragon Ball Z uncut or something like that? And like
Yeah.
that was part of the appeal to me, was it looked and covered subject material that applied to me, but it also felt like it treated you a little bit like a grown up.
Yes.
And that was part of the selling point of why I fell in love with anime when I was younger, more than almost anything else.
Yeah, I think for me as a kid, it's like what really shapes you as a creator is watching that stuff when you're 11, 12, 13 that was really, you probably should have been watching when you're 17, 18, 19. But it's like
Yeah,
watching those early horror movies, watching those early extreme anime movies just a little bit too early makes such an impression.
yeah,
And yeah, I don't know, at the end of the day, it's like I think it's easy to just write what you like and write what you love. If you're trying to do a different version of yourself or make it a little bit more like this or a little bit like less extreme, you're going to be forgetting what sort of a story you want to tell. If you just do what you want to do, then it's easy and you're just batting 1,000. And a big part of it also is working with my artist on the book, Saspy, uh, talking with her about what do you want to draw? Like, what do you like drawing? What kind of things do you feel like? Because ultimately, she's going to be putting in hour for hour a lot more work into the book than I am,
sure.
250 pages. And so a
Oh,
lot of it was just she loves horror, she loves Halloween stuff, she loves creepy stuff. And so it's kind of just looking for she lives in Italy, and so
okay.
not a big spoiler, but like a big part of the book later on takes place in Italy. And so a
Oh,
lot
that's
of it was just
cool.
kind of like stuff that she would like to draw. I'm like, I want to load this book up with as much cool stuff for you to enjoy drawing as possible because the art's just going to be all the better for it.
How did you and I'm sorry, it completely went out of my head.
Saspy.
Saspy. How did
Her,
you
yeah,
guys hook
her
up for an art team?
that so it was interesting. You mentioned that it kind of the book gave you River City Girls vibes. I created it with Rem, the illustrator from River City Girls. But we knew, I mean, she has a full-time job doing the comic Devil's Candy, so we knew that Rem wouldn't be able to illustrate it. So basically, she did the character design, she did kind of some of the concept art. If you buy the book, there's this really gorgeous illustration that she did at the back of it, like a piece of key
Ooh,
cover art. But we needed to find an artist that, could do the full book. And so Saspy was just somebody that Rem and I both followed. She's really interesting Italian artist. She has a really cool original horror comedy duo of characters called Fashion Monster that, very much is in the vein of this and kind of, when we were looking at potential artists, I thought, oh, she can do the creepy stuff and she could do the funny stuff, and that's kind of what is needed. But a lot of what she's done has just been, tie-in comics like Rugrats and things like that, like very licensed stuff. So I
really?
think, yeah, I think this one, hopefully when this comes out, this really puts her on the radar of a lot more places. Because even within the book, even looking at how she started with original concept art, and we did like a little 10-page sample story, and then going to the actual 250 pages of the book, it just feels like she constantly leveled up her game and got more and more confident. So I'm really excited to work with her on, future volumes, but I also just want to see the industry just like latch onto her because I think she's really a hidden gem.
Sure. One of the things that at first kind of threw me was the like Catholic school setting.
Yeah.
And then there was a part that stood out on one of my rereads of Everly being asked, like, do your parents really believe in like the church and like the mythology of Christianity? And she was like, I think they just believe kind of like the surface level.
hmm
And then it really hit me of like, no, she's being confronted with not just the idea that these things are real, but they impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
Is is there going to be an exploration of what Ev believes in as the book goes on, or the characters around her as she has to face these things? Um, not totally by herself,
Yeah.
judging by one of the early chapters, but
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I mean, a lot of the focus is on her developing herself as a character. And so it's a lot about like, that's why early on, yeah, you have her kind of doubting everything, doubting, herself, doubting her belief in religion, doubting her belief in everything and her abilities and her friends and all that stuff. And I think you kind of see that as you go throughout she has a lot of uncertainty. She doesn't know what she wants. She doesn't know who she is. A lot of the external forces are kind of it's funny on a superficial level. It's like, well, it's a big demon trying to scratch your face off, but it's also on there's like a lot of subtext to a lot of them of like, who do you want to be? What are you interested in? Who
oh,
do you
cool.
want to be around? What's your personality? Even stuff like, over the course of the story, you get peeks into her like, budding love life and friendships and family and extended family, all that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to route everything back to her. And then in terms of like, yeah, the religion, I mean, it was, just I wanted something where there's some specificity to it. I think a lot of stories are just kind of like, oh, I've got my teen pro tag and, they're just a kid and they just go do blah blah blah. So I really wanted specifics. I wanted that, her to be kind of like first generation Mexican American. Her mom speaks a lot of Spanish throughout the book. I wanted that like private school Catholic kind of background and upbringing. So I just wanted her to be a very specific character and have as we went, there are moments where we could kind of tap more into that. We can tap more into her Mexican heritage. We can tap more into the Catholic background in a way that I probably didn't even think about when I was initially plotting the story, which is nice.
Okay. Do you have a strong background in religion yourself, or are you more like her parents, kind of like, well, I believe the structure because it's there.
Yeah, I've gone in and out of it. So I was not raised with a particular religion, and then I became very Christian myself when I was in junior high, probably not that far from Ev's age. And I
Okay.
think that is like the age where you kind of think, what do I believe in? Why do I believe in stuff? And then as I've gotten older, I still have faith, but I think like everybody, you kind of, waver or you question your faith. And so yeah, it's definitely stuff going on with, her is definitely stuff I've gone through myself. And I
Sure.
think also like, my kids are 13 and 16, and I look at them, not specific to religion, but in terms of just like confidence and questioning things, getting very confident about one thing, but then not having confidence in another area. And it really feels like that period, like from junior high up through the end of, or maybe even the middle of like high school, is where everything is just chaos and you're slowly kind of putting the blocks into place and figuring out who you're going to be. And so I just figured that'd be a really interesting time period in someone's life to have all this crazy over the top horror stuff because she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know what she wants to be. Even her and her best friend Jeannie, who are like very tight, how does this affect them? How does this strain their
Sure.
relationship? And so, yeah, really, I felt like it was kind of a ripe period in someone's life to have all these supernatural events forced on top of them.
There was one moment that really stuck out to me as kind of like a quiet demonstration of Ev's personality where she sneaks out and she goes to the school and she finds like some glass plates outside of
Yep.
it and she breaks one on accident and then she's just like and she picks up a pipe and she just starts smashing them and
Yeah.
the responsible adult in me
Yeah.
was like, look at this punk kid breaking stuff that's not hers, and then
Yeah.
the part of me that was a punk kid was like, bro, you broke so much stuff for
Yeah.
no reason than just to break it. Like she's still figuring out, does she care? Like
Exactly.
how does she
She's
process
not
all
even
this?
necessarily like a particularly good person at the beginning. She's just a kid. And I really love that that's exactly the kind of stuff that I'm appreciative that IDW didn't come back and say, well, she seems like kind of a jerk here. Why is this moment here? Because it's exactly that. It's like I don't want to have her be this perfect little angel. I don't want to have her be, overly like I'm the bad kid and I'm gonna flip at some point. I just want her to have like be a very nuanced character. So yeah, that I love that moment. I love the fact that that resonated with you, that it's like it's a weird moment. Like you barely are like 10 pages into the story and you're like she's kind of just destroying a bunch of school equipment for no reason. This is very weird, but I wanted that sort of also to be kind of a hint of like she this character that we've seen be very meek and very timid and like the bullies are coming and I got to cross the street before they reach me, that she can have this kind of more aggressive side to her and balance between the two of those, between meekness and aggression over the course of the book.
Well, she says, I think once or twice, she says like, I want to be stronger. Like she's
Yeah.
got a little bit of that anime shonen
Yeah.
protag of,
Exactly.
God, I
Yeah.
just want to be stronger, if for no other reason than to develop that confidence in herself.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons, like I said, I don't like to judge a book before I get to read it. That was one of the things that I was having trouble getting my head around the book because we're so early in Ev's journey. And like you said, she's not really a super like likable
Right.
character. She's a
Right.
little bit like
Yeah.
not mean, but just like there's a distance that
Yeah.
she's starting to put between
Yep.
herself and her family as she gets
Yep.
older. And
She's mean to her sister for no reason.
yep. And obviously you want to have a flawed character so you can watch them grow over the course of the
Yeah.
story. It just makes those first couple chapters a little hard to be like, this girl's a little bit, she's a little bit mean. I don't know if I'd hang out with her
Yeah,
in school
hopefully
or
it
not.
comes out. But like everything you're mentioning has follow up. So it's like her with her family has follow up, her with her sister, her with the school, her with her friends. So hopefully we'll see. Once you get to the rest of the other 10 chapters, I'd love to hear what you think. But hopefully that's the goal, is basically come up with a character that is pretty everyday and in no way capable of being like the savior of humanity, demon slayer of all time. But maybe she could be. Who knows?
Sure. Well, and I think when thank you, Co. Um, maybe 20 years ago in the comic book industry, I feel like a lot of promos for this would have talked about it being like very like Miyazaki inspired in terms of
Yep.
like, well, it's got a lead female character and she's really young. And I don't feel like there's a lot of Miyazaki, but I did see some Chihiro from Spirited Away,
Yep.
where when that movie opens up, Chihiro's kind of a pissy little pain in the
She
butt
is.
about
Yep.
having to move. But that's what makes the whole journey so good, is to watch her open up and gain that
Yes.
confidence.
No, that's my favorite Ghibli movie of all time. One of my favorite movies of
It's
all
so
time, and
good.
absolutely Chihiro was a huge influence on the Ev character. I wanted something, yeah, very intentionally where you start off with somebody who's not a sweet little angel, and I like that she's kind of a little jerky at the beginning of that. I also like in Kiki's Delivery Service when she just gets moody and doesn't want to talk to people. It's like, to me, those are the moments that feel like truth as far as these kids.
Yeah, it always breaks my heart when she gets Kiki's is my personal favorite Ghibli movie. And when she starts getting like saucy with Gigi, and I'm just like,
Oh
oh,
yeah. Oh
he
yeah.
just wants to help and be a good friend. Like, calm down, please.
Oh, then keep reading. There's
Oh,
there's some of that in here too.
that's fantastic. I did. I was surprised. So there was quite a bit of humor in Romeo and
Yeah.
Juliet and Godzilla. I
Yeah.
I love the like surprise squashings that happen because there's no build up to them. It's
Yep.
just here's a character and then they get stepped on.
Yep.
That really caught me off guard. There was a great moment in 13 Demons Dead. Having read it and then gone back to reread it again,
Yeah.
there's a line with Father Serrano sees her drawing like her bullies with their heads cut
Yes.
off,
Yeah.
and he goes, "There'd be way more blood than
Yeah.
that." And on first read, I'm like, oh, okay, he's a cool teacher trying to be the cool guy. And then after I read it again, I was like, oh no, he has experience with decapitating things.
Yeah,
That's way
he
darker.
knows a lot about blood, about gushing blood.
That's way more than I thought it was. And like I said, I like
Yeah.
um clearly there's a good setup and payoff, which gives me confidence in Ev's story being really well explored.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that, that moment between the two of them, it's like there's a kinship of the weirdos. It's like, she is the girl that gets bullied, and then, she finds solace in drawing decapitated versions of the bullies on paper. Like that's something that, in a modern society, if somebody saw that, you go to the counselor and you get your parents called in and
100%.
be a lot of concern. But it's like, no, kids smash glass when they find it in an alleyway, and they draw angry pictures of the people they hate. And yeah, I wanted it to be as true as possible to what I remember. Not that I did specifically those things, but to how I remember growing up as a kid in the 80s.
Sure. Well, I grew up drawing. There was a period there where I was drawing my own comic books for a little while. And in like especially in school, like again, I wasn't drawing my classmates being killed, but
Yeah.
you want to draw cool actiony stuff and
Yeah.
violent scenes and stuff like that. But yeah, I could definitely see somebody being like, we need to have a conversation about this. And it's like, no, you just don't know how to process
Yeah.
being upset at people who are mean
Yeah,
to you yet.
exactly. That's what it is she doesn't know how to process anything at this point, and she's learning over the course of the book. And again, God bless them. I love IDW for just running with this stuff, not even just on 13 Demons Dead, but on Godzilla. Like we have some gnarly stuff in there. I really wanted specifically for Sean, the artist, to draw really gross stuff like when, spoilers, but the book's been out for a month and a half, but like when Juliet's eating the heart and it just like gushing all over the place and looks really gross in her hands, and when Romeo's vomiting all over the church. Like those are moments where I'm like, this will be so fun. And Sean completely nailed it. And I love that IDW never said like, why do we need this? And it's like, just because it's cool and gross, and that makes it fun.
Yeah, as I say, that's you want to kind of like what's the point of doing a Godzilla and Romeo and Juliet unless you're going to lean into that level of weirdness?
Yeah.
And same kind of thing for this. If you're especially, I think that there's a slight, maybe it's my perspective on it, but I do think there's a slight difference in just going, this is a teenager without any religious background fighting demons. That could be any comic with any
Yes.
character. The first thing off my head is like Witchblade, where she
Right.
fights all kinds of demons and monsters, but she never has questions of faith or
Yeah.
what is she dealing with at
Yep.
all. Giving it that religious background, I feel like grounds it for Ev in a way that other comic characters don't really get to play with as she's going to be wrestling with this going forward. And then for
Yeah.
me, that asks an interesting question of, well, if she's going to be learning this is how you defeat monsters, will she apply that logic to the monsters in her life, like her bullies, or will this experience hopefully educate her in a better way? And then, of course, either of those could be really interesting story paths. But again, that's why you need to read the
I
book,
think
right?
I think a lot of the threads you're pulling at are you'll see in the next 10 chapters.
That's what I like to hear. That's
Yeah.
from you had mentioned earlier that you would like to do more volumes. I think that's the classic comic book line of, well, if we get to do more, I would love to do more. Um, does the first volume work as like a pretty much standalone kind of
Yes.
story, or does it work as very much like a setup of multiple things?
Yeah, it's mostly a standalone. So, and that was
Okay,
in big part to our editor, Jake. The initial pitch I did, because initially I pitched it as like an ongoing series where it would have been 12 issues. That's why it's so dang big, is 250 plus pages.
sure.
And the idea was that it would be a monthly comic, but also 1 month would advance with each chapter. And so that we did keep that within the book. You get 12 chapters plus an epilogue. It goes through 12 months of her story.
I like
And
that.
I wanted to do something that would go on, and I figured that the initial story arc would take place over the course of many different years. And Jake said, well, it took you guys 3 years to make this, and we don't know if we're going to make another one. So he says, like, button it up nicely. So we kind of have a really nice conclusion within this first story arc. It does end on a clear cliffhanger, and then we
Okay.
know exactly what we're doing in volume two, and then I know how that exactly leads into volume three. So we've already got ideas for that kind of stuff. But yeah, that
Wow.
it is the kind of thing where if we never get around to doing another one, it still wraps up very nicely, and hopefully the things that people got really pulled in about on this book, they have a nice conclusion by the end of the book.
Okay. That's good to know, especially for it being a graphic novel. I
Yes.
know like the the comic book store side of the industry generally from my experience generally tends to struggle with like a graphic novel. But then of course like bookstores sell
Yes.
graphic novels like crazy.
Exactly.
Um and especially like being able to slot this into or near like the manga section I feel like is a
Hmm.
really good fit in a way that again I think comic stores might struggle with. Um but same kind of thing. This is also a new property and IDW I also generally think of them as like kind of a franchisee company. Like a lot of
Yeah,
their
for
stuff is
sure.
licensed. So for them to take such a big risk on like a brand new concept and then be like, we're gonna drop a whole book, guys. You're getting the whole
Yes.
thing in one go.
Yeah.
That's a huge shout of confidence.
Yes.
And then like I
And they
said,
seem they seem to dig it so far. I mean, we'll see if everybody latches onto it, but and I think also it took us over 3 years to make this. It took us 3 years of just full production.
sure.
What I'm thinking is, this I was so blessed that we got this huge first, I think it's like 254 page just for the story content, not the extras, volume. I think with the future ones, we would make those more like about 100 pages each because
Okay.
Saspy and I can knock out 100 pages in a year and change. And what I really want to do is I want to get into a regular cadence where we're doing a new book every 1 to 2 years. So I think this one is like you get this awesome big deep dive on Ev and everything about her. And then if we're lucky enough to be able to do future volumes, then hopefully you'll get one every year or so. And then those will be like 100 pagers from then on.
Okay. That's it immediately makes me think of Kazu Kibushi's Amulet graphic novels
Mm,
over at
mm,
Scholastic.
mm.
Where I want to say it's maybe 2 years between when it was ongoing, 2 years between books.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but those were fantastic and
Yeah, for me, a
always
big
worth the wait.
influence was the Courtney Crumrin series by Ted
Okay.
Maffei, and I don't know how many he did over the course of like a decade or two, but it's probably like a dozen books,
I
and
think
they're just
so.
these beautiful individual mysteries and adventures. I love those things.
Yeah. And then I do agree. I think if you can get your setup in the first volume and hook the audience on the characters in the
Yeah,
world, a lot of the heavy lifting's been done, and then it's come back. Hopefully, you're going to have a good time in as things hopefully get bigger or crazier as the book
yeah.
goes on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the hope. The other
that's
nice thing
exciting.
about this versus issues is it's not in the like standard order process of comics because I saw that with Romeo and Juliet. It's like there's a period where it's like it's not yet for pre-order, it's not yet for pre-order. Okay, pre-order it really quick. Okay, it's in stores really quick. Okay, then it's gone. And it's like it's so temporary versus this.
Yeah.
You can go to like even though it doesn't come out for 3 or 4 months, you can go to Amazon right now, pre-order it, Barnes and Noble, all the major websites, and after it launches, you can continue to go there. So there's kind of a nice, you know, uh, uh, longer tail in terms of availability for an original graphic novel as opposed to individual comic book issues.
Sure. I do think Image has done a better job of it recently. of creating books, not that are specifically meant to be collected, but creating smaller projects that they can collect faster
Yeah, yeah.
to get in like a trade paperback section or a bookstore to help sales. Because I tend to agree, it's one of the reasons I don't cover a lot of brand new comics on the show, is because the second you cover a new comic, you've got 2, maybe 3 weeks until the next issue comes out,
Right, right.
and you either have to cover everything so quickly. I don't know how some of these YouTube channels are so fast with
Yeah,
their
yeah,
their
exactly.
coverage of stuff. It boggles my mind. But more props to them for being able to pull that off. I like to sit in it for a little bit and just like let it roll around in my head of like, what did I just read? Oh
Yeah, 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 yeah.
man.
Well, we'll when we're getting closer to the release date, we'll get you the full copy as soon as possible, so you have some time to chew on it before you do a review. If you want to review this one.
Well, that would be fantastic. I'd love the chance to read it in full. I'd already
Yeah.
planned on like, well, I'm gonna have to pick this up now, if only to see like, can you pull off a whole graphic novel, my man? Like, I've read one comic book, a whole graphic novel's that's a beast, man.
The other thing is it's a pet peeve of mine on graphic novels, webtoons, manga, everything when there's not a lot of dialogue. Like nothing bugs me more than buying something that's about an inch
Interesting.
thick and I flip through it in like an hour and I'm done. So, I mean, you can assert from even the first two chapters, it is dense as far as the dialogue, the storytelling. I
Yeah,
mean, I grew up on Stan Sakai with Usagi Yojimbo. I grew up on guys like Kyle Baker and Evan Dorkin, and these are guys that use a lot of words.
sure.
And so for me, that's what I wanted. So it's not something, hopefully for the better, when you buy this, you're not going to plow through the 250 pages in like an hour or two and be done. It's more the kind of thing where maybe you read a chapter a night. And I really wanted people that spend I think it's 16.99 on this book to get your money's worth, to not feel like I plowed through it in an hour and a half. Now what do I do? I want
Sure.
something that was like a very sizable adventure.
Well, and that's especially as a new dad, I don't get to sit down and read like I used to anymore, especially physical media.
Yeah.
Um, and reading books on my phone is great, and I like it. Reading comics on my phone, there's a huge disconnect in my brain where I just don't keep the information like I do
Mm,
holding a book in my hand. And so reading the chapters that you sent me on my
yeah.
phone were definitely like my phone's right here and I'm zooming in and then I got to zoom out and then zoom back in. And so no, getting the chance to actually have it in hand and get a chance to
Yeah.
read it will be so nice as opposed to,
I'm the same. As much as
oh,
I love e-reader technology, I'm always going to be a paper guy. Whenever I can get a paper version of a comic or a book, I'm always going to go for that.
yeah, I have felt bad. I had a friend gift me a trilogy of books recently, and he's been like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I was like, "I
Uh.
don't think you understand. I don't. If I sit down with a book, my child's gonna have that book, and then I
Yeah,
don't get to
yeah.
read it anyways.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah, yeah.
been a long crawl. But yeah, I've had to settle for like, oh, I'll read a chapter a day when I get a
Yep.
chance.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's like I said, that's just nice because it lets you sit in the world a little bit longer and think about it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
do you know, is this going to be standard trade paperback size, or will it be like a manga bookshelfy kind of little
It's
thing?
I think it's listed on Amazon, the dimensions. I believe it
Okay.
is more manga sized. So
Okay.
I don't think it's as at least as big as like full size floppies comics. So I don't recall offhand exactly what size it is. I
Okay.
remember that we were very particular, Saspy the artist, because the gray tones that she does in the book are not gray. She's stippling, she's doing little dots, individual dots. So everything is either pure black or white.
Whoa.
Yeah, she's doing old school, like the comics
No
in the
wonder it
60s.
took so long. That's
Yeah. And
crazy.
so when you do that, you very have to be very careful about the resolution of the printing and the resolution of the book, or else it starts to kind of make weird patterns in the dots. But yeah, it's and I've never worked with an artist that did that. Everyone else I worked with just does like swaths of gray in Photoshop. But yeah, if you zoom in, every single thing is either pure black or pure white.
That's
And she
cool.
needed to know the exact dimensions of the book for that to work well.
That's when I was making my own comic books, I would do screen tone in Photoshop. And I
Yeah,
learned
yeah.
very quickly the same thing of you don't get to play with the dimensions after you finish the
Yep,
artwork because
that's
you
it. Yep,
you blow it up and suddenly that the space that was this close before is this close and it looks
exactly.
completely different to the human eye. Um
Exactly.
I mean, good for her. That's crazy. Oh, that just makes the artwork that much more impressive because it's not like the
Yes.
book is light on toning either.
No,
Um,
no, super
it's
aggressive. And the
yeah.
other thing is she it's 100% uh ink on paper. None of it is
Oh, that's
digital. So
beautiful.
I think the tones are digital. She's laying those in digitally, but the actual artwork is she's one of the few artists I've worked with that still is doing ink on paper.
That's fantastic. Oh,
Yeah.
I love the old school stuff. There are a lot of really good modern artists who are fantastic with the digital style.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm just I grew up on the old comic books. I like them to have that hand-drawn feel.
Yeah.
I do feel
Yeah.
like there's a difference.
I agree.
Um, so that's fantastic. That's great to hear.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a great chat.
This has been fantastic. Um, the 13 Demons Dead comes out this August. You
Yep.
can pre-order on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm assuming you could go to your local comic shop and ask them to order it.
I think
That's
so. Yeah, anywhere that they can get graphic novels, anywhere they can get trade paperbacks, it should be available.
that's fantastic. That's the local comic shop is always going to be
Yes.
my personal favorite. But wherever people can get it, that's easiest for them is what I will advocate for at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you live in the Los Angeles area, when the book comes out in August, I'll probably try and do some local signings. So
Oh,
hopefully I
that's
can
awesome.
meet some people in the Southern California area as well.
Oh, that makes me even sadder that I'm on the East Coast. Oh man. Not
You
that
know, and some other places though, so for Golden Apple, will do signings and ship them off. So
Oh
I
really?
signed about 50 copies of Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla for them. So
That's
hopefully we
awesome.
can do that too. Hopefully we can get, whether it's Golden Apple or another place, hopefully we can get some signed copies by me and Saspy online for people across the world to get their hands on.
That'd be fantastic. What a great collectible.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, thank you for your time. Like I said, this has been a lot of fun.
Before this episode ends, I wanted to have an opportunity to show off some more of the artwork from 13 Demons Dead. Uh, and I also kind of wanted to provide a little bit of final thoughts on the whole thing. I didn't go too far into an actual review of the comic book or general plot questions because this is a preview that I got to read. It's two out of what I'm assuming is 12 chapters, if the idea is the book's going to cover the first year of Everly's adventures, which would mean that I've read 2 out of 12 stories, and it's really hard to judge a comic book on 2 out of 12 stories before any of the rest of it has been released. I feel a lot more comfortable talking to y'all about something like Batwoman because the whole idea of a monthly released comic book is you can read an issue or two, do a vibe check, and then go, oh yeah, I'll get the rest of this, or I'll try to get the rest of this, or I'd like to, or whatever the case may be. I don't mind talking to you about the first 2 issues of Batwoman because I hope that you will be excited about it and you'll pick it up as well. But if I sit here and tell you about 2 out of 12 chapters of a graphic novel, that feels like an insignificant portion of the whole, right? With that being said, I'm really grateful for having been given the opportunity to read these 2 out of however many chapters it ends up being. He said the whole book was like 250 pages, which is a nice sized graphic novel, let me tell you. Uh, but it is hard to get a bead on the whole overall story. So much can change between that second chapter and the end of the book. I don't know if there's any new characters. I don't know if anybody else shows up. I don't know how much focus some of the bad guys are going to get. Um, if I had a complaint about 13 Demons Dead from the little bit that I read, and again, this is knowing that I read only a little bit, um, it is that for whatever reason, I was expecting more character work on the 13 Demons. The book is very much focused on Everly and her social situation and how she is handling or failing to handle this new situation and setup for her life. The fact that she has to hunt down these 13 demons because if she doesn't, they're just going to keep making the world a worse place. She has the power, she has the responsibility, so she has to learn to deal with this, and it just also feeds into this idea that she doesn't know her place in the world. She has her best friend, but she's got bullies at school. She doesn't quite believe in religion. She doesn't know what she wants out of life at this point. And I think, again, like I said in the interview, I do think that this is an interesting way to explore who Everly is, help her to grow up, help her to figure out what she does want out of life. And I think it's a really cool setup. I like the look of the two demons that I got to see in the preview. I think the demons look cool. Adam had mentioned that he really wanted this book to be something that would take you a while to read. He didn't want it to be something you could just flip through really quickly. And when I was reading this comic, I will fully admit, he said one of his inspirations was Stan Sakai. I thought for sure it was going to be Chris Claremont, because there's a lot of dialogue in this. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I think it works well. He does have a lot of characters that he's introducing, and there's a lot of social character work that is going on within the story. So I don't think the dialogue's bad or that there is too much of it. Other than a couple like exposition-y pages, because obviously you have a lot of setup that you're going to have to cover in the first issue of a graphic novel. I think that the dialogue is handled pretty well. Everly is sassy and sarcastic and a little bit withdrawn. Again, she just doesn't know who she is or who she wants to be. I like her reaction to when she initially finds out what is going on with her and this whole thing that she has to kill demons. Initially, she tries to avoid the whole situation, and then the more that she thinks about it, the more she's like, I don't think I can avoid this. This is coming for me no matter what. I might as well be prepared for it. That's a classic piece of heroic literature. That's right there in Joseph Campbell's The Heroic Journey. You must deny the call to adventure before you can accept the call to adventure. Bam. Beautiful. I really do like Saspy's artwork. Not Saspia, but Saspy. It is incredibly dynamic and not so much intense. The thing that threw me off, the reason that I had asked about the comic is very violent, is because looking at the artwork, it is very cute, and it does make me think of a lot of anime or manga that I grew up reading or watching. And then there are parts where it gets really bloody, really heavy. Like I said, there's a character who is having like his arm broken in the story, and it's not an implied break. You get to see it happen. And I don't think that it's like too graphic for kids to read. Again, if this was something that young Ben had at like 12 or 13, wouldn't have blinked an eye at it. I saw Psylocke get eviscerated in the X-Men comics by Sabretooth really shortly after I started buying X-Men comics. One of my first issues of Uncanny X-Men saw Storm rip out Marrow's heart in a battle for innocent lives. And all of those things were very heavily implied within those comic books. So again, I'm not really a stranger to violence or grossness in my comic books. I'm perfectly fine with it. But I did kind of get that vibe check that this could be like on this could have been on the Midnight Run on Toonami type of thing. And I think that's really fun. Like I said, there was something, I don't remember what it was, if it was a book or a YouTube video, but there was something that I was watching where they talk about every kid, when consuming media, wants to consume media that's a little bit older than they are, right? So if you're an 8-year-old, you want to watch the cartoons that the 10-year-olds are watching. If you're 10-year-olds, you want to watch the cartoons that the 12-year-olds, and so on and so on. This, to me, feels like right in that vibe. It can absolutely appeal to like a 13 or a 14-year-old, somebody who is Everly's age, but I do think that it could appeal to a little bit younger and still work and not be too much. I don't recall too much in the way of swears. The only thing that I can remember actively disliking about the book was the fact that Everly was being picked on by 2 other girls in her class, simply because it really feels like it comes out of nowhere. Like, Everly is not weird, right? She is not the strange kid in class. She's not particularly, like, made fun of for, like, her looks or anything. Like, she looks cute. Looks like an average girl, in my opinion. So I'm not 100% sure why she's being picked on, other than the kids are picking on her. But it's hard to complain about that in a 250-page graphic novel when you only get to read 2 chapters. Maybe her bullies get more fleshing out. Maybe there's something going on with the bullies that will tie in with the demons and allow you an opportunity to explore the complicated feelings that Everly's going to have about that situation. I simply don't know without reading more. And that's one of the reasons why I want to read the book, to see if there is more there. I am pretty confident that one of the big factors of the book is going to be Everly finding a teacher to teach her about these demons and how to fight them. There's a mysterious woman on the cover of the book that we don't get to meet within those 2 chapters, so I do think there's an important bit of the story that we're missing in this preview. And so I'm excited to find out who that character is and whether or not they can help Everly, or whether Everly will even listen to them to begin with. And yeah, overall, like I said, I think the show's a lot of promise. I do intend to pick up the comic. I do want to read this. I don't 100% know if I'm going to cover it on the show, especially in depth on the show. I've never covered a graphic novel on the show, I don't think. And I've been trying to kind of switch up how I do things just as I figure out how does this work with the baby in my life. But maybe I'll keep that in mind. Like I said, overall, I did have a good time reading the chapters, and especially rereading them was when I was noticing more of the small details and more of the character work. Again, I am typically somebody, when I buy a comic book, I buy it, I read it, I set it down, and I read the next thing. I brought it up in the episode for a reason. Sitting down with a graphic novel is not something that I'm going to sit down and reread all that often in my life, especially with a bunch of monthly comics coming out. I mean, even when I was buying manga all the time, I'd read one volume of manga, put it down, pick up the next volume of manga. There was not a focus on rereading to study, but of course that's what I do for Breakdown. So it's what I wanted to do for my interview with Adam, so I reread the story multiple times, what I had available to me, to get a good vibe check and start thinking about it, and start thinking about these characters as well-developed, well-written characters, as opposed to, this is my first time reading this book, and I don't know what's going on, let's just do a vibe check. So I do think that there is some depth there. I do like the fact that author Adam Tierney does quite a bit of setup and payoff, even within the 2 chapters that I read. There is stuff, just the way that I could see the story being structured, I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel intentional, because it got referenced in this little thing got referenced in chapter 2. It very much feels like he wrote the whole thing and thought about the whole thing, as opposed to just well, I'm going to make up one chapter at a time and hope that things go well. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to say as far as the comic's concerned. Again, I really appreciate Adam for reaching out and contacting the show, especially as I'm beginning to get my feet wet with production and writing and figuring out how do I do all this stuff again. It was a real boost to morale to have the opportunity to talk to somebody and kind of share my love of comic books and Godzilla. I wish, it's one of those things where I wish we could have chatted just more about everything. But we're both parents, we both have jobs, we both have lives. It was great to get to meet him. I did enjoy Romeo and Juliet and Godzilla. I really enjoyed the promo for 13 Demons Dead. And I'm looking forward to picking up the book later this year. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this, and we will see you next... I'm releasing this on a Tuesday. We will see you next Thursday. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.